In celebration of Arcane Season 2, after 3 years of agonizing patience following the cliffhanger at the end of Season 1, as a bit of joint promotion, Riot sought to include one of its prominent cast members into League of Legends. Speculation over who that would be ran rampant throughout discussion boards, with many hoping it would be Silco, possibly Mel, who did indeed get added to the game not too long after. I for one wanted Savika to make a debut. She's by far my favorite Arcane character, but little do we know it would be none of them. Instead, and quite appropriately, the warmongering matriarch of the Medarda clan herself, Ambessa, complete in her battle uniform. Not exactly who I had in mind, but I don't think anyone would have complained about her. As a character, she carried basically every scene she was in, and for better or worse, that commanding presence would transfer over to League as well. Though she's only been out for a year and change, Ambessa quickly made a name for herself as one of the most prevalent champions in the game, particularly in the upper echelons of play where in Diamond Plus, she's been consistently holding double-digit pick rate across the board, and likewise a noticeably high ban rate as well. Public outrage has primarily been focused on her daughter Mel for her numerous annoyances, but considering Ambessa had almost a 70% ban rate when she first came out and has only pretty much gotten nerfed ever since her release, to still be one of the most banned champions in League isn't something you could say the same for many others. For today's episode of Permanently Banned, we'll be discussing Ambessa and her dominance in high elo. What governs a player's decision to ban a champion tends to boil down to two things. First, and this pertains especially to one-tricks, if the target in question is known to outright nullify a group of champions' ability to function. For example, Yasuo sustains a notoriously high ban rate even when he's not the most difficult champion to deal with, for the simple fact that Windwall can shut down most champions' pressure entirely throughout the course of a fight. Similarly, many people choose to ban Mel because their rebuttal can be even more damning than Windwall for certain champions. Secondly, characters are banned if they play in such a way that can lead to polarizing outcomes and/or experiences. The main case study for this would assuredly be Pyke. Pyke may not necessarily hard counter any champion, but his penchant for high aggression and roaming in the early to mid game, not to mention potentially being a greater threat than the ADC in a teamfight, can snowball games damn near instantly in the hands of a skilled player. On the other end, you have Shaco, historically one of the most commonly banned junglers purely for his high disruption and disorienting abilities. In layman's terms, he's annoying. You'll notice that neither factor relates to how strong a champion is, and such is the case when evaluating bans in League. On many occasions, yes, if a champion is disproportionately stronger than the competition, they will have a high ban rate, but that tends to peter out with a nerf or two. For some champions, even if they're weak or underpowered, the experience of playing against them can strip a player of their agency to influence the outcome that they would elect to just not deal with it whatsoever. Ambessa happens to be one of those champions. Obviously in low elo, Ambessa is nowhere near as dominant, so my silver, gold, and platinum viewers might be scratching their heads as to why I'm including Ambessa in the permanently banned series. But much like the 4 horsewomen of top lane or many of the game's skirmishers, of which Ambessa is also one, the higher up in rank you go, the more you realize just how overpowered they can be in the right hands. From a playstyle point of view, Ambessa plays in a fashion reminiscent of Riven, a character whose mobility and offense are one and the same. Just as Riven's attacks involve her moving with every cast, all of Ambessa's abilities are able to buffer a short dash in any direction afterward, automatically giving her some of, if not the best combat mobility in the game. More pressing is that her combat mobility is entirely unconditional and non-targeted. Combat mobility is sectioned off into 3 categories: targeted, non-targeted, and tempo. The first 2 are for any burst movement options, aka dashes or blinks, while the third is based on movement speed itself. For example, Irelia's mobility is targeted in that Blade Surge can only be used to home in on an enemy or neutral unit. Targeted mobility is almost exclusively meant for offensive pressure, as in the case of Irelia, she cannot use Blade Surge to run away from enemies. Therefore, the range of use cases for targeted mobility is kept in check by the inherent need for things to click on. Tempo-based mobility concerns any champion who can boost their movement speed by a considerable margin, enough to where under normal circumstances they can easily catch up to or run away from a champion. In some scenarios, tempo might be even more powerful than conventional dashes, often due to being more sustained, thereby traveling a farther amount of distance than any one dash. That being said, tempo is balanced by quite literally being unable to cut corners, aka dash through walls, and should the champion in question be hit by a slow of any kind, that effectively cancels out the increased tempo. The aforementioned balancing factors keeping those 2 forms of mobility in check are what makes non-target mobility regarded by many as the best form of mobility in the game. Dashes or blinks that do not require a target to be casted. It's often rare for a champion to have even one non-target dash, let alone multiple. It's here where the first reason for Ambessa's popularity and high ban rate come into play. Simply being able to unconditionally dash in any direction grants the user a laundry list of benefits in combat. Having just one of these dashes makes a considerable difference in a fight. For Ambessa to dash 5 times in a single rotation, the amount of things you can do with that are far too numerous to count. The most apparent one, of course, would be avoiding skill shots. By her very existence, Ambessa will naturally be difficult to take down for any champion relying on skill shots to apply pressure. Whether by intent or inadvertently, dodging even one critical projectile or attack results in a considerable loss of pressure from the opponent. It can be something small like dodging a single Ezreal Q, or it can be something critical like avoiding a Yone ultimate. Whatever the case, Ambessa's penchant for simultaneously dealing her own damage while sidestepping enemy damage makes her a very polarizing opponent to fight. Another noteworthy benefit of non-targeted mobility is that in a manner it can be used as tempo. Ambessa's kit's designed around auto-attacking in between casts every Q, W, and E to restore energy in order to fight for extended periods of time. However, she has enough energy to use Q, W, and E all at once, letting her traverse the map rather quickly, as she can still input dashes without having to strike a target. This affords her the capacity to chase down fleeing enemies or put distance between them and her. She may not be able to go over walls using Drake Count Step, but that amount of mobility is tough for any champion to outpace. On the subject of chasing down opponents, while not the same as Drake Count Step, public execution makes running away from Ambessa damn near impossible unless you yourself also have a lot of mobility. An extremely quick long-range blink that bypasses all enemies in the line of fire to only tag the farthest enemy champion within the area. Even if a champion has a dash, putting someone between you and them can make it difficult for them to reliably access you, especially given many dashes in this game stop on the first enemy champion struck like Warwick, Sylas, Camille, and such. That, and if the frontline has any crowd control, that's another way they can block you. Ambessa's ultimate being coded the way it is ironically makes her a better diver than actual diver champions. Few cast members, if any, possess the backline access that she has. Combine that with their constant dashing, and if the person playing her sets their mind to it, they can and will run you down, making escape almost impossible against her. Ambessa's mobility is among the most open-ended in the game. I dare say her combat mobility is even greater than some of the most dash-heavy champions in the game like Yasuo, Yone, Riven, Irelia, and such. Perhaps not in terms of absolute distance, but her ability to apply damage and to reposition at the same time, or just reposition if that's all she needs to do, grants her limitless playmaking potential. I'd even say her mobility even surpasses Riven's, because if Riven wants to dash away with her Q, she loses out on the damage that comes with it, whereas Ambessa, for example, can Q her target, then backstep away to avoid counterattack. In top lane, for example, she can Q, then use the mobility to back away from a Darius Q, sidestep a Mordekaiser bonk, maybe dodge an R boomerang, or simply use it to keep distance away from her target. Just that alone is a winning trait, and with a few of those, she can easily outsustain her lane opponent. The second reason behind her continued success would be that she takes advantage of all the properties of both a skirmisher and a diver, two classes whose strengths can theoretically cancel out the other's weaknesses. This might sound familiar, as it's the same reason why Cassante being both a tank and a skirmisher should not be a thing. A major downside to being a diver is how committal they are. Once you get in, you have no choice but to punch your way out or die trying, so if your initial engage isn't enough to break the enemy team apart, you're in for an uphill battle to survive. Additionally, divers tend to be one-and-done champions. Once they burn their engage, if the enemy team can quickly create distance between them, they'll likely be unable to continue pursuing the target right away. Skirmishers, however, are characterized by their sustained DPS and sustained mobility. Even if the target tries to dash away thanks to increased tempo and/or low cooldown dashes, skirmishers are able to press the attack. On the other hand, a common weakness of a skirmisher is their relatively short burst range. Even if they have a dash, said dash can't be used to jump an entire screen ahead, making it easier for the enemy team to kite you out if they had the means to space their attacks and abilities. Divers, however, carry some of the farthest burst range of any champion, easily contesting the threat radii of even artillery mages. At any point, they can engage from a full screen away, whether by dashes or simply running you down. Even the likes of Xerath and Vel'Koz have to be extremely careful of a Jarvan or Pantheon engage. When you think about it, Ambessa can sound like both of them. Thanks to public execution, her all-in potential rivals that of Vi, Hecarim, and Lee Sin. 1250 units is more than sufficient at catching any champion in the game. No way if Fiora, Bel'Veth, Gwen, or Zahan can move that far that quickly. From then on, thanks to the energy refund on her passive, by weaving auto attacks in between her moves, Ambessa can fight for extended periods of time, since towards the mid to late game, her Q and E cooldowns drop to roughly 5 to 6 seconds each, short enough to be considered DPS tools. As well, even if the opponent has an escape option once they get ulted, Ambessa can relentlessly pursue them, leaving them with no other option but to stand their ground and fight. That is, if they can even put up much of a fight. Ambessa may play like a diver, but her kit's designed to be a skirmisher through and through. As such, she is the perfect arsenal for dueling. Repudiation amasses an enormous shield that scales based on her AD, meaning building damage also makes her tankier. Though it only holds out for 1.5 seconds, the shield value is so massive that it can typically tank one major attack from a target. So on top of dashing all over the place to avoid non-point-and-click attacks, even if you land an attack on her, Ambessa can easily negate the damage, especially if she builds Eclipse, adding an additional shield. Also, lest we forget, striking her before she dashes causes her to deal more damage against enemies. Likely the main frustration of fighting her though is that somewhere down the line it comes off as if Riot forgot about power budget and just gave her every superpower. Not saying that's a fact, but I can see why people feel that way. Another major weakness of skirmishers is their primarily single target nature. Most of them can only focus the bulk of their pressure on a single enemy, essentially capping how threatening they can be. Ambessa, however, has no shortage of AoE pressure in her kit. She can do tons of damage to multiple enemies, owing to her hybrid diver status. While true, the full damage of her Q2 can only hit one target, it doesn't change the fact that her Q1, W, and E can strike all enemies in the line of fire for considerable damage, and even for her Q2, she can still hurt enemies beyond the first. In other words, as she's blowing up her main target, she's also doing quite a bit of DPS to enemies around her as well, making it so upon dispatching the first enemy, she can turn to the second enemy and blow them up shortly after. Now I understand Ambessa is not the only skirmisher with a lot of AoE. Riven can also blow up multiple enemies simultaneously, perhaps even better than Ambessa. But Riven has nowhere near the same backline access or open-ended mobility as a Medarda, and more importantly, she's the only member of the 4 horsewomen to struggle against armor. Riven deals exclusively flat physical damage, no % health damage, no true damage, nothing of the sort. Any summons of armor diminishes the DPS way more than a Fiora, Irelia, or Camille. In fairness, Riven does have 2 forms of AoE hard CC in her base kit, whereas Ambessa has none, but that aside, Riven means would kill to have even half of what Ambessa has. Cutting Sweep and Sundering Slam combined, assuming you land both empowered hits, result in 270 base plus 150% bonus AD plus 12% base max health damage, increased by 7 per 100 bonus AD. And given Ambessa typically requires around 250 in the late game, a single cast of her Q1 and Q2 can do north of 30% max health damage, easily allowing her to shred even bulky enemies when you remember she gets 30% armor penetration for free, giving her plenty of damage against both squishies and bulky champions alike. That tends to be why more often than not you'll find Ambessa players rushing a mixture of lethality items in conjunction with bruiser ones. Lethality makes her capable of one-shotting squishies by ulting them then bursting them down immediately, and then bruiser items afford her the staying power to continue fighting even after the initial engage. Frustrating matters even more is that in addition to her massive shield, Ambessa can also heal a considerable amount off all ability damage dealt, further incentivizing her to build lethality since the more damage you deal, the more you can also heal. Skirmishers tend to have only one or the other, healing or shielding. Ambessa has both, and no small amount of either. You can reduce her healing, but it won't stop her shields from blocking tons of damage. Conversely, you can reduce her shielding, but she can still heal from her ultimate passive and items like Endless Hunger and Death's Stance. Ultimately, Ambessa is one of the hardest champions in the game to fully shut down on account of her kit granting her so much agency. She's among the most unconditionally mobile champions in the game with incredible backline access, something a skirmisher really shouldn't have. She is both healing and shielding, forcing you to itemize against both to truly hamstring her sustained capability. She has % health damage and armor penetration, making her very strong against even tanks, and being an ability caster, she can frontload her attacks all in one to insta-kill squishies. She is strong single target dueling thanks to being a skirmisher, but also strong teamfight pressure by way of being a diver. Bottom line, she has so much going for her that there's never a game where Ambessa isn't a threat. Ever since the day she came out, Ambessa has been one of the most popular top laners in the game, with almost every challenger top laner having her as a pocket pick, if not outright maining her. Following the changes to make her viable in the jungler, every jungler now plays her too. The only thing stopping her from having a positive win rate is her inherent skill floor and ceiling, but there's a reason why she's picked ban in Masters Plus. This woman is absolutely busted. A good Ambessa player is practically a walking flea on side order for any backline ADC or mage, and she excels at punishing mistakes, in turn making her insanely good at 1v9 in games. At the end of the day, the risk of Ambessa escalating out of control is so high that most people would prefer to ban her altogether. I wouldn't disagree with anyone who calls her an honorary member of the 4 horsewomen. What do you guys think about Ambessa though? Do you believe she's overhyped, or do you agree with the general sentiments people have towards her? Let me know in the comments down below. That'll be all for today, so if you enjoyed the video, I would appreciate it if you'd like to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and why not check out my other permanently banned episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.